We are now about to turn and begin Pehei Beis, the last three words on Pehei Aleph. Umotzi b'sar Pesach michabur lechabur minayin. How do we know that there's a violation of a lav if a person takes the basar or the Pesach out of one chabura and he brings it to another chabura? In other words, if a person takes his bar Pesach out of the house, out of the bayis, then for sure there's a los. It says lo sotzi min abayis achutza. But here he took it from one chabur to another, and how do we know that's included? How do we know? The Gemara is asking that the iser of hotza min abayis applies even within a bayis from one chabura to the other. And that's the first two words on Daf Pehei Beis Michabur LeChabur Minayin. How do we know that if within the same house there are two chaburas that are eating on different sides of this like large salon? How do you know that bringing it from one chabur to the other is a violation of the law? This Tanya we learned in the Brisa. The Torah literally only speaks about taking it out of the house, and therefore Chabur Chabur doesn't say minayin. How do we know that's also included in the Isa Talmud Lomar? The pasuk adds the word chutza. It could have said lo sotzi min abayis min abasa. It didn't have to add the word chutza because it says you're being motzi min abayis. It's chutzle achila. So it's telling us that not only if you take it out of the bayis, but if you take it out of its makom achila, within that same bias, from Chabur Chabur, you likewise violate this law. Rabbi Ami, Amotzi b'sar Pesach michabur lechabura. If a person on the night of the 15th of Nisan takes the Pesach from one Chabur to the other, Eno Chayav, there's a condition that has to be met. It's a very fascinating sheet of Rabbi Ami. Ad she'aniach, until he places the basar down in the second chabura, and the reason for that is hotzah ksivbe. The Torah says lo totzi, which is the verb of the noun hotzah. Now you and I wouldn't have paid attention to this in a million years, but Rabbi Ami says that the word hotzah is a deliberate word, has to be understood as a halachic concept, and kishavs. From whence do we derive the definition of hotzah in Pesach as far as taking the basar Pesach out? We derive it from Shabbos. Ma b'Shabbos adi ovid akira vehanocha. In order to violate the Isur of hotzah on Shabbos, you have to lift it up. That's called an akira. Take it into another ritual and place it down. That's called hanocha. Afachanami here too. Of course, once he takes it out of the chabur, he did an akira. But has he placed it down with hanocha? Is adi ovid akira vehanocha. It's not enough that he took the basar out of the chabura. He's got to place it down in the second chabura, and then he's implemented an entire hotzah. Masiv Rabbi Abba Bar Mamo, he has a Gemara in Masechet Zvachim, and this Gemara is going to be a problem for Rabbi Ami. This Gemara is addressing the case of Parim Hanisrafim, which is either Para Helen Dova Shel Tzibur, or it's Paro Shel Kohen Gadol, or the Sar of Yom Kippurim, Par Kohen Moshiach. All these require sreifa. The entire para has to be burnt outside of three machnos, meaning outside of Yerushalayim. And we learned in Masechet Zvachim, Hayu Sovlim Osan Bimotos, the Kohanim would place these Parim Nisrafim onto poles in the Azara, and they carried these poles and took it out, Chutz Machnos, Sholosh Machnos, out of Yerushalayim in order to burn it, Kimitzvasa. And the din is that anyone who's involved in the burning of these Parim becomes Tameh with a Tumas Begadim. That's called a Tumah Chamura. The Pasuk says in Vayikra Tezayin, Vasorefosam Yichabes Begadav. That's Kibus Begadayim. He's Matami not only himself, but his Begadayim. And this Tumah is chal the minute he leaves the azara, and therefore harishonim, right, the original kohanim that are carrying the parim from one side of the motos, yatsu lechutz lechomas hazara. Let's say they are the rishonim; they're up front. The pallbearers that are up front, they already left the chomas hazara, and the achronim, those who are bearing these motos in the back, lo yatsu, they didn't leave the azara. Is rishonim mitamim b'gadim, v'achronim ein mitamim b'gadim. The tumas begodim is chal the minute you left the azor. So even though you're holding on to the same pole with the para nitzaf on it, and those at the head have already left the azora, but you're still within the azora, and therefore you're not mitame atuma chamura. So the Gemara asks the following question: I don't understand. The front people have left the azora, therefore they're mitame. Holo nach. The Torah says in Vayikra Daled, el michutz lamachna, etc., etc. So the word hotzah appears in the context of the param and israfim. And you, Rabbi Ami, have assumed that whenever it says hotzah, you need a hanacha. And the people who are bearing these motos on the front, they have not done a hotzah because they didn't do a hanacha. And the Gemara answers, who? Mosivla, v'hu mefarikla. And Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel, who's the one who asked the question, he gave the answer to the question. And what did he answer? Bit nigrorim. That the case was that they were dragging it on the karka. That's the sugya, the Mishnah Zvachim. That means they weren't carrying the basar suspended in air. In that case, they would have to do anacha in order to contract the tumah chamura, but rather they dragged it on the karka. And therefore, every step that they take and they put their foot down, when you drag something in Hilchas Hotzah Shabbos, that becomes a hanoch. And now we're up to the Mishnah here in the middle of Daf Pehei Omid Beis. The Mishnah deals with the case, as we saw earlier, because this Mishnah was quoted twice already on Daf Pehei Omid Aleph. Half of the limb of this Korban Pesach left Yerushalayim, was Yotze, and the other half was within. Aver Shiyotze Miktsasa, so part of the limb was taken out of the Chomos of Yerushalayim, and it's possibly din Yotze, and you have to separate it from the rest of the basar because it requires sreifa, you're not allowed to eat it. Is Chotech, he cuts some of the basar around the bone at the point where it left chutz l'Yerushalayim, atshebagila etzem. Now he exposes the bone itself. He has now cut out all the basar, separating the basar that he needs for achila, that's bifnim, from the basar that has to be burnt, that's posel. That was yotze. And then kolef atshebagila perek v'choteh, and he peels away the basar, and he reaches the perek, where the joint, where the two parts of this longer bone are connected. We have to take anatomy 1.1. Chotech, and there he cuts the etzem, and he separates the two parts of the etzem. One part is yotze, its possible has to be gotten rid of, and the other part is part of the Korban Pesach. Ube mukdashim, that's as far as Korban Pesach is concerned. In other countries, if part of the Eva goes chutz, is kote, so all he has to do is take a kofit. The kofit's a very large hammer, a knife, and he just coats it. He just literally severs this bone in half, such that the basar that's chutz is now separated from the basar that's bifnim. In other countries, he has that option because there's no Isur Shviras Etzem. He can cut the bone. Okay, that part of the Mishnah is not going to be addressed here in our Gemara because we've already addressed it earlier in the Machlok Shin Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. What's new about this Mishnah that's going to occupy our minds is the Sefer of the Mishnah, which deals with a totally different subject matter. And that has to do with the opening of chalonos, or for example, when you enter into the Chomos Yerushalayim and you're at the entranceway of the Shar, what's the status of that Shar? Are you inside Yerushalayim? Are you outside of Yerushalayim? And the Mishnah establishes that minha gaf vilifnim kilifnim, and minha gaf vilachutz kilachutz. It depends where in the entry you are. If you're on the part that is facing Yerushalayim, it's the inner part, then it has the status of Yerushalayim. So, for example, you're allowed to eat kachim kalam anywhere in Yerushalayim. You're allowed to eat Masechet anywhere in Yerushalayim. You'd be allowed to eat min hagaf v'lifnim. But if you're min hagaf, you're on the other side of this opening, v'lachutz, towards the outside, then kilachutz, it's as if he's outside Yerushalayim. Now, in my Gemara, we have two diagrams of what this looks like and where this hagaf looks like. These two diagrams represent a machlokas rishonim about how to interpret our Mishnah. I don't know if by chance you have diagrams in your Gemara. I could try to show it to you. I know if I was more sophisticated, I would do a screen saving or something along that line, but it's not terrible. I think verbally I can explain to you what you see in these two diagrams. One diagram, which is the one here on the right in my Gemara, explains that you have the two sides on your right and your left of the entranceway, the thickness of the wall. And then when you leave that area, there is a door, and that door is on the end of this agaf, of this threshold. Let's just see how he translates the word agaf into English. Just 1 second. Doesn't help me. He calls it a door jamb. I don't know. I have no idea what that looks like. Maybe in the footnote he gives another word for it. Let's see. He says it's the area in which the door closes, the space between the inner lip of the gateway and the stop which the door strikes when it closes. Anyway, there's a door here in this area. Now, where is that door? So the first shita, which is this right diagram, is that the door is on the outside, sort of like a gate. I remember when I was in Cape Town, and there were many. No, actually, it was in Johannesburg. There were many structures that looked like this, where you had the gate, and then as you go outside, there was a door for security reasons. So then, min hagaf v'lifnim means that this entire area that's in this opening, this entrance, is considered Yerushalayim because the door is milachutz. So it's only that which is on the other side of the door, which is out of Yerushalayim. The other picture, the diagram that I have here on the left, which is a different shita, and all this will be nogeh to hilchos tefillah. If let's say you, as the Gemara is going to develop it, you're standing in that area, the minyan is inside. Are you part of that minyan or you're not? And in today's, outdoor minyanim, this is all could be very, very relevant. So this second sheet that has this doorway midway in the thickness of the door on the right, on the opening of the entrance to the Ishar on the right and the left, right there midway. And then, in my opinion, the Gemara reads smoothly that, which is lechutz and which is that. It depends which side of the doorway you're on. But the whole thing is discussing the agaf. And the Mishnah concludes by saying, "Achalonos v'ovi achoma kilifnim." Any windows or windowsills and the ovi, the thick area on the top of the choma, like the thickness of the wall, are all considered inside Yerushalayim. And that's called kiddush, meaning that the chalonos and the rosh hachoma were niskadju, Whereas the opening way, the Gemara is going to say, was not sanctified. That entrance way that we spoke about before the Agav. And we'll see why in the Gemara. This distinction between inside and outside is relevant to tefillah. And if a person is standing on the agaf, if he's lifnim, he's considered as if he's inside the city as far as Yerushalayim is concerned for achilas kodshim, or Masechet is concerned. And the same din applies to being mitzaref to the minyan of Asara in a Beis HaKnesses. So you have 9 people davening inside the shul. And the 10th person is standing at the entranceway into the shul. If he's standing on the agaf bilifnim, on that part that is towards the inside, then he's mitzarif to the minyan. But if he's on the agaf ilachutz, he's considered outside the Beis HaKnesses. He's not part of the minyan. So we end up with 9 people and not 10. Upliga de Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. However, this statement in the name of Rav is against Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Afilu mechitza shel barzel eina mafsekes ben Yisrael avim shabbat shamayim. Even if you had a metal door, it would not create a hefsek between the 9 people who are on this side of the door and the 10th who's on the other side of the door. He could always be mitzaref together with them for the tefillah, because there's no such thing as a hefsek between Bnei Yisrael and their Father in heaven. So the Gemara asks the following question: Ha gufa kasha. The Mishnah seems to have a contradiction in the Mishnah itself. Amrit, the Mishnah says min agaf vilifnim kilifnim, that if you're on the inner side of the agaf, you're considered inside of Yerushalayim. Ha agaf atzmo kilachutz, which would mean, by implication, that the exact place where this door would be, let's say the door is open, that's considered as if it's outside Yerushalayim. But Sefer, if we look at the Sefer, we come to the exact opposite conclusion, because there it says min agaf vilachutz kilachutz. Only if you're on the other side of this doorway of the agaf, then you're considered outside Yerushalayim. Ha, the implication is ha'agaf atzmo kilifnim, that if you're at exactly the point of the agaf, that's considered as if you're inside. So we have what's called diyukim sosrim. We have a conflict of 2 implications from the Mishnah. So let's just review this. This is self-contradictory. First, you said in the Reisha that from the agaf and inwards, you judge it as it's in the inside, implying that the area of the agaf itself is considered the outside. And from the Sefer, we get the exact opposite conclusion. And the Gemara answers, lo kasha. This is not a contradiction. Why? Kan, the second din, is b'sharei azara. Now we're talking about the entranceway of the walls that surround the azara. And the Mishnah says that only min agaf v'lachutz lo niskadju. They're not sanctified with the kedushas azara. So it means that kodshim kodshim cannot be taken outside. So that, on the contrary, it's shari azara. And what we're saying is that only min agaf v'lachutz it wasn't sanctified, it's outside. But the agaf itself is sanctified. But kan b'shar Yerushalayim, there was a special takana that the Rabbanan made not to sanctify the shar, the entranceway into Yerushalayim. And there, it's only going to be considered inside Yerushalayim, min agaf v'lifnim, on the inner side. But the width of the opening itself was not sanctified. And why is that so? The Omer of Shmuel, Bar Yitzchak Mibnei Malon is Kadshu Shari Yerushalayim. Why did they make a special takana? That although we sanctify Sha'arim and the areas between the right and the left in the opening, for example, in the case of the Azar, but we will not do so with the case of Shari Yerushalayim. Mipnei HaMitzorah. Let's understand. A Mitzorah is sent, is the only Tumah that's sent Michutz L'Shalosh Machnas. Not only is he excluded from the Azara, not only is excluded from the Harabayis, he's even excluded from Yerushalayim itself. And now he is waiting for his opportunity to be re-entered into Yerushalayim. So he's imagined standing at the Shar Yerushalayim, waiting for his moment of entry. And what we're going to do is we're going to at least give him a protection, physically protection for the elements, while he's standing at the Shar Yerushalayim. From the hot sun and from the rains, he's going to be protected. So we're going to leave that part where he's going to get protection at the Shar out of the Kiddush, and he won't be sanctified. The Omar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak, V'nei Malon is Kadsha Shar Nikanor. Shar Nikanor is the entranceway into the Azara. Mipnei Shemitzoraim, the Mitzorah who's coming to be Mitzayir himself, Omdim Sham, they're going to stand at the Petach, at the opening of the Azara. And now, in order to experience the Tara process, Machnisin Bahonos Yadam, they can now put the thumbs into the Azara, and they'll do what's called Hazav Dama Ha'osham, Al Tnuch Boen Yideim and Ragleim Shel Mitzorayim. Now they can't enter into the Azar because of the halacha of Mechusar Kapara. Since their carbon has not yet been brought at this point, they cannot enter into the Azar. So the Rabbanim deliberately left that rochav, that width of the Shar Nikanor, out of the Kiddush to facilitate and allow the Mitzoraim to stand at that opening, at that entranceway into the Azara. So the Gemara says the following, that in the case of the gateways of the Azara, so in general, with the exception of Shar Nikanor, they are considered bifnim. They have Kedushas Azara. Of course, when the Rabbanim were Mekadosh an area, they included the Sharim, the gateways were included in the Kiddush. But in Shar Yerushalayim, they left it out, and the Shar itself is not sanctified. And why is that? Because the Mitzoraim will take refuge underneath in the summer because of the summer heat, and in the winter because of the rain. So again, a Mitzorah, he says, summarizing what we said in the Hebrew, is excluded from all three camps, and he's even excluded from Yerushalayim. And since he cannot enter Yerushalayim, or for that matter, any other Ari Mukafos B'Yisrael, a walled city in Israel, so if the gateways had been sanctified, then the Mitzorah would be forbidden to take refuge underneath them, because he has to be sent chutzle gimel machnos. So therefore, at the time of the Mikdash, like for example, Ezra and Nehemiah, they left it unconsecrated. Now, as far as the chotzer, as far as the Azor is concerned, all the sharim of the Azora were sanctified, with one exception, and that's Shar Nikanor. He says that Shar Nikanor was the eastern entrance into the courtyard, and once again, he has a diagram here. And the reason for this is because Mitzoraim would stand there on the 8th day of their purification. So now they're allowed to enter into Yerushalayim. They can enter into the Arbais. They cannot enter into the Azora because they have the status of Mechusar Kapara. And they insert their thumbs into the Chotzer, into the Azora. So the Kohen may now dab their thumbs with the blood of the Korban Osham. And he says that when a Mitzorah is healed of his tsaras, and he already went through the 7-day purification, and now he has to bring an Osham Achatas and an Olah on the 8th day. He was healed, he was purified, he's allowed to enter into the Harabayis on the 8th day, but he cannot enter into the Azar because he hasn't yet brought his Karbanos, he's Mechutza Kapara. Now, one of the Mitzorah's requirements is the blood of the Osham, which is daubed on his right thumb, his big right toe, and the middle part of his right ear. Now, this creates a dilemma. On the one hand, the Mitzorah may not enter into the Azar. On the other hand, the Dam cannot leave the Azar. It would be possible. So the solution is that he stands at the Nikanor gateway. He inserts one limb at a time into the Azara, and he's daubed. And this is permitted because inserting a limb into the Azara is not considered bia. He's also bia because he's mechusar kapar with an isa kares, but this is not considered bia. He hasn't entered into the Azara, and therefore, for the purpose of the process of purification of Bahonos Yodayim, we will encourage him to move his Bahonos inside. And finally, to end the daf for today, Achalonos v'ove achoma, and we said that the windows and the how do we call it, the upper stories, I'm sorry, the thickness of the wall, that's what we said. These are all judged as the inside, as if they were as being sanctified. Omar, but Gagim, however, with regard to rooftops and aliyos and upper stories, right? There were many komot. There was the lower koma and a top koma of many of the parts of the Azara. Lonis kadosh, they were not sanctified. So the Gemara says, "Ani, is this really true?" Va'omar Rav mishum Rabbi Chia, kezesa pischa va'alela poka igra. You can eat a kizayis worth of Pesach, and you could recite Hallel on the top part of the roof. In other words, they started eating the Pesach in the bayis, and then they climbed up to the roof. Now, you just told me, Rav, that lonis kadosh, so they don't have the sanctity. Is my lav on the top of Daf Pei Ches? It says the achli be'igra, the amri be'igra. They went up to the roof and they ate a kizayis of the basar Pesach. They went up to the roof and they recited hal, a special hal for the eating of the carbon. And if that be the case, we see that there was a kiddush of the gagim of Yerushalayim, and that's against Rav. And this statement over here is Rav himself, is a contradictory statement here in Rav.